The annual family gathering at the Bennett estate was always a display of wealth and status. Expensive cars lined the driveway, designer outfits filled the room, and conversations revolved around investments, luxury vacations, and business achievements. Among them sat Ethan, the youngest member of the family. Unlike his cousins and siblings, he lived quietly. He drove an ordinary car, rented a small apartment, and rarely spoke about his work. Because of that, everyone assumed he was the least successful person in the family. Over the years, Ethan had become the target of subtle criticism. His relatives often questioned his choices and compared him to the others who openly displayed their wealth. While they celebrated expensive purchases and social status, Ethan simply listened and kept to himself. At this year's gathering, the criticism became impossible to ignore. Several family members openly discussed how Ethan lacked ambition and how he had failed to live up to the family's reputation. Some even suggested that he depended too much on the family's name instead of creating his own success. Ethan remained calm throughout the evening. He neither argued nor defended himself. The more they spoke, the more confident his relatives became in their assumptions. What nobody knew was that Ethan had spent the previous decade building a technology company that operated almost entirely behind the scenes. The company provided software, infrastructure for major corporations around the world. Because Ethan preferred privacy, his name rarely appeared in public. As dinner continued, a group of unexpected visitors arrived at the estate. They were executives from an international investment firm. Their purpose was simple: finalize a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that required Ethan's approval. The Bennett family reunion was the most important social event of the year for everyone connected to the family. Relatives traveled from different parts of the country to attend, gathering at a magnificent estate that overlooked a private lake, surrounded by acres of carefully maintained land. The property had been in the family for generations and served as a symbol of everything. The Bennetts valued wealth, success, influence, and prestige. Every year, the reunion followed the same pattern. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway long before sunset. Family members arrived wearing designer clothing and expensive jewelry. Conversations immediately turned toward business achievements, investment gains, property acquisitions, and financial milestones. The gathering was officially about family, but everyone knew it had become an unofficial competition. The purpose was simple. Everyone wanted to demonstrate that they were successful. Among the dozens of relatives attending that year was Ethan Bennett, a 30-year-old man who seemed completely different from everyone else. Unlike his cousins, Ethan never arrived in a luxury vehicle. He drove a modest sedan that looked almost out of place among the collection of high-end automobiles parked outside the estate. His clothing was simple and practical. He never wore expensive watches or displayed visible signs of wealth. To most of the family, Ethan represented unrealized potential. They considered him intelligent but unsuccessful. They considered him capable but unambitious. Some even felt sorry for him. For years, Ethan had maintained an unusually private lifestyle. Whenever relatives asked about his career, he provided brief explanations and avoided discussing details. Because of this, the family had constructed its own version of his life. Most believed he worked as a small, independent consultant. Others assumed he held an average position in the technology industry. No one suspected anything extraordinary. As a result, Ethan had become the family member everyone underestimated. The assumptions grew stronger every year. Each reunion reinforced the narrative that had developed around him. While relatives discussed promotions, investments, and business expansions, Ethan remained quiet. While others proudly displayed achievements, he showed little interest in attracting attention. The contrast made him an easy target for judgment. Many family members genuinely believed they were helping when they discussed his future. They offered advice, recommendations, and suggestions for improving his career. They believed they understood his situation completely. The reality was very different. Nearly 10 years earlier, shortly after graduating from university, Ethan had begun developing software from a small apartment. The project started as a side endeavor inspired by a problem he noticed while working with businesses. Many companies struggled to manage increasingly complex digital operations. Existing solutions were expensive, inefficient, and difficult to scale. Ethan believed there was a better approach. The idea seemed promising. The challenge was turning it into reality. The first few years were difficult beyond anything he had anticipated. Funding was limited. Competition was intense. There were countless moments when the project appeared destined to fail. Most startups never survived. Most entrepreneurs eventually abandoned their ideas. Ethan refused to quit. Instead of pursuing rapid growth, he focused on building a product capable of solving real problems. He spent years refining the technology, improving performance, and listening to customer feedback. Progress was slow. Revenue remained small. Recognition was virtually non-existent. Yet beneath the surface, something important was happening. Businesses that adopted the software began achieving impressive results. Customer retention remained exceptionally high. Recommendations generated new opportunities. Slowly, the company developed a reputation for reliability and innovation. What began as a small project gradually evolved into a growing business. Then growth accelerated. Small contracts became larger agreements. Regional clients became national clients. National clients became international partners. Within a few years, the software was supporting organizations across multiple industries. Financial institutions adopted the platform. Healthcare providers integrated the technology. Logistics companies relied on its systems. Manufacturing businesses implemented its solutions. The company expanded faster than anyone expected. Most importantly, Ethan retained ownership. While many entrepreneurs accepted outside control in exchange for investment, Ethan remained careful. He raised capital selectively and protected his position within the company. As a result, the extraordinary growth directly increased the value of an organization he largely controlled. Yet, despite these achievements, Ethan remained almost invisible. The company operated primarily within enterprise technology, rather than consumer markets. Industry professionals knew its importance, but the general public rarely heard its name. Ethan preferred it that way. He never sought publicity. He avoided interviews. He declined speaking engagements. He refused opportunities that would place him in the spotlight. His focus remained entirely on building a great company. Back at the reunion, none of these accomplishments were known. Family members continued discussing their own achievements with confidence. One relative had recently purchased additional commercial property. Another had expanded a successful retail operation. Several others celebrated investment gains and business growth. Each story received admiration and attention. Meanwhile, Ethan listened quietly. Years of experience had taught him not to react. The assumptions no longer bothered him. He understood that most people judged based on appearances. Because he chose not to display wealth, others assumed it did not exist. Because he remained private, others assumed there was nothing worth discussing. Because he avoided self-promotion, others concluded he lacked accomplishments. The misunderstanding had become almost amusing. As the evening progressed, conversations increasingly centered on future ambitions. Guests discussed plans for expansion and growth, new investments, new projects, new opportunities. The atmosphere reflected confidence and certainty. Many family members believed they had already achieved extraordinary success. Few realized they were sitting beside someone whose accomplishments exceeded theirs combined. Outside, the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon. Lights illuminated the estate grounds. Reflections danced across the surface of the lake. Inside the dining hall, servers delivered dessert while conversations continued. At first, nobody noticed the arrival of several black, executive vehicles entering the property. The cars moved quietly through the main gate and followed the long driveway toward the mansion. Eventually, guests near the windows spotted them. Conversations slowed, curiosity spread. The vehicles appeared professional and coordinated. Clearly, they were not ordinary visitors. One after another, they parked near the entrance. Several individuals emerged, carrying portfolios and document cases. Even from a distance, their appearance suggested importance. They moved with confidence and purpose. The arrival generated immediate speculation. Some relatives assumed they were business associates of one of the family's entrepreneurs. Others believed they represented an investment firm. No one connected the visitors to Ethan. That possibility seemed too unlikely. Estate staff greeted the group and escorted them inside. Moments later, the visitors entered the dining hall. The room grew noticeably quieter. Every eye followed them. The individuals appeared highly professional. Their tailored suits, organized materials, and composed demeanor reflected years of experience handling significant transactions. Rather than approaching senior family members, they moved directly toward Ethan. The effect was immediate. Confusion spread throughout the room. Several relatives exchanged puzzled looks. Others watched with growing uncertainty. For the first time all evening, attention shifted entirely away from the usual subjects of admiration. The visitors greeted Ethan with obvious respect. Their body language suggested they viewed him as the most important person in the room. That single detail unsettled many family members. It contradicted everything they believed. Over the following minutes, the visitors began organizing a collection of documents and financial reports. Large folders appeared on the table. Detailed presentations followed. Although the specifics remained unclear to most observers, one fact became increasingly obvious. The visitors had traveled a considerable distance specifically to meet Ethan. The realization created a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Confidence slowly gave way to uncertainty. Family members who had spent years assuming they understood. Ethan suddenly found themselves questioning those assumptions. Why would senior executives travel across the country to meet a supposedly ordinary consultant? Why were they carrying documents that appeared connected to major corporate transactions? Why did they treat Ethan with such respect? Questions multiplied. Answers remained elusive. Yet the growing mystery captured everyone's attention. As the visitors continued preparing their materials, fragments of information began to emerge. References to valuations, mentions of board approvals, discussions involving international investors, terms commonly associated with billion-dollar transactions. Each detail increased the room's curiosity. Something significant was happening, something far larger than anyone had imagined. For years, Ethan had quietly occupied the background of family gatherings. For years, he had been overlooked, underestimated, and misunderstood. Now, for the first time, everyone was beginning to realize they knew almost nothing about him. The certainty that had defined the reunion slowly disappeared. In its place emerged anticipation. The visitors were preparing to reveal information capable of changing everything the family believed about Ethan Bennett. And as the room fell silent in expectation, nobody could have imagined just how dramatic that revelation was about to be. As the silence settled over the dining hall, the visitors finally began presenting the purpose of their arrival. Detailed reports were placed on the table, followed by financial summaries, valuation documents, and acquisition agreements. What initially appeared to be routine corporate paperwork quickly revealed something far greater. The executives represented an international consortium that had spent nearly a year negotiating the acquisition of one of the fastest-growing enterprise technology companies in the world. The company had expanded across multiple continents, served thousands of major organizations, and generated extraordinary annual revenue. The founder, majority shareholder, and final decision-maker was Ethan Bennett. For a moment, the information seemed impossible for the family to process. The quiet relative they had spent years dismissing as average had secretly built an organization worth billions. Everything they thought they knew about him collapsed in an instant. The executives continued their presentation, explaining how Ethan's company had transformed several industries through innovative software systems. Financial institutions relied on the platform to manage critical operations. Healthcare providers used its technology to improve efficiency and security. Global logistics networks depended on systems developed under Ethan's leadership. What had begun in a small apartment 10 years earlier had evolved into an international powerhouse. The valuation figures were staggering. The acquisition would rank among the largest technology transactions completed that year. Industry analysts had described the company as one of the most remarkable growth stories of the decade. Investors from around the world had competed for the opportunity to become involved. Yet through all of it, Ethan had remained almost entirely anonymous. While others chased recognition, he focused on results. While others showcased success, he concentrated on building it. The contrast became painfully clear to everyone in the room. Family members who had proudly discussed their achievements earlier suddenly found their accomplishments feeling insignificant. Properties, investments, promotions, and luxury possessions no longer seemed as impressive when compared to what Ethan had quietly created. The realization spread throughout the hall. For years, they had judged him based on appearances. They had mistaken simplicity for failure. They had confused humility with a lack of ambition. Most importantly, they had assumed that visible success was the only kind that mattered. The executives eventually presented the final approval documents. Months of negotiations, legal reviews, and financial planning had led to this moment. The transaction required one final signature. Ethan carefully reviewed the paperwork, paying attention to every detail. The room watched in complete silence. When he finally approved the agreement, the acquisition became official. In a single moment, Ethan's wealth increased beyond anything most people could imagine. Yet his reaction remained unchanged. There was no celebration, no dramatic announcement, no attempt to prove a point. He simply completed the process with the same calm, professionalism that had guided him throughout the evening. After gathering their documents, the executives congratulated him and departed. The room remained silent long after they were gone. Everyone seemed lost in thought. The reunion that had begun as a competition had turned into something entirely different. For the first time, many family members understood that success was not always loud. It did not always arrive wrapped in luxury brands or public recognition. Sometimes it worked quietly in the background for years while nobody noticed. As the evening came to an end, Ethan collected his belongings and prepared to leave. Nothing about him had changed. He was still the same person who had arrived at the estate earlier that day. The difference was that everyone else had changed. The assumptions were gone. The judgments had disappeared. The underachiever they thought they knew had never existed. As Ethan walked out of the estate and toward the parking area, the lights of the mansion reflected across the lake behind him. Inside remained a family forced to confront how wrong they had been. Ahead of him was a future shaped by years of patience, discipline, and quiet determination. And for the first time, the people who had underestimated him, finally, understood a lesson they would never forget. True success does not demand attention. It eventually reveals itself.